Now we do welcome in Brett McMurphy, Stadium College Football Insider. Very excited for this because Brett was the man before The Last Dance came out last night on ESPN, was the man who gave us a ton of content to talk about these last few weeks, whether it was college football playoff expansion, and more importantly, different options if college football does not start on time, how we could see college football at some point in the academic year. So Brett, we do welcome you on here. Thanks so much for giving us a few minutes. How are you this morning?
Good to catch up with you.
Same, likewise as well. So, Brett, I think it's, obviously no one knows the real answer, right? Whether will sports return, if they return, when they return. So, at least I guess it's safe to assume at this point, can we pretty much assume that college football will not start on time in August? And if so, that's probably also the case that we will not have 100,000 seat stadiums with fans in it if college football was to start in August?
Yeah, I just think it's going to be hard to get going in August. As you mentioned, I reached out to all 130 athletic directors in the past few weeks and asked them their thoughts on if the season is delayed, what are some of the options? And it was, varied from starting in October, November to even starting as late as after the Christmas break. So it does seem unlikely. We're still a little more than 4 months away from the start of the college football season. It does seem unlikely we will start on time. There's 7 games set for August 29th, including Navy and Notre Dame and Ireland. And I don't think anybody actually believes that Navy and Notre Dame will be able to play in Ireland. But it's still scheduled. It looks unlikely, but we'll see. I mean, everybody's, like everybody listening, and you and I, we're all waiting for the all clear when things can go back to normal and or as close to as normal as before. And until we get that notification, whether it's medical official, government officials, society in general, whatever that is, all these athletic directors have all these plans in place, but they just don't know when they can implement them until they get that green light.
So speaking of, let's hit on some of those plans, like you said, because you kind of outlined 4 different ideas that athletic directors kind of gave to you that said, if college football doesn't start on time, here are some ideas about how we can fit in the season and still try to make as much revenue as possible despite it not starting on time. And that was, like you said, you maybe span over 2 semesters, start it in October, November, have a winter break, and then resume in January, February. You can move the entire season, have some spring football where you hinted at and said we can have a college football playoff national title Memorial Day weekend, which would just be, from a viewing perspective, absolutely crazy. We have one option I think we can already rule out, which is, classes are online in the fall, but players are still allowed to come back. I think the vice president, when you had some of those conference commissioners talk with vice president, that was kind of the one outline and one idea they said that probably won't happen. And another idea you had was cut out the September schedule, basically cut out the non-conference and have our 8 or 9 game conference schedule start in October. So out of those 3, with 2 of those ideas spanning into the spring semester, what is the most realistic if we were going to have football or as close to college football as we know it sometime during this academic calendar?
Well, I mean, really, it's impossible to say because it's all dependent on when we get the all clear. If we get the all clear in September and you can get things going, then they have a decision. They can take all 3 of those options. Obviously, they would prefer to play a 12-game season for revenue purposes as opposed to a conference-only season. But there is some concern among the athletic directors that they don't want to, if possible, they don't want to play at the same time as March Madness for basketball. Certainly, if you start in the spring, you're not going to be able to avoid that. But if you can start in October, November, then you could get the season wrapped up in March before the NCAA basketball tournament, because obviously that's a big deal money-wise or financially for the NCAA and more importantly for the member institutions. So it's not really that anyone says, hey, this is the best option. It's just like, again, when can we put these plans in place, and then we'll figure out which way to go. So, if we don't get the all clear until, November, December, then we probably have to wait until after the Christmas break. My opinion on what I think happens, there's no way we're going to start on August 29th. That's just my opinion only. I think it's very unrealistic that these university presidents are going to allow all these students to come back on campus, all these students from all over the world to come back on campus in the fall. And so because of that, I think a lot of major universities are just going to do online classes only So if you can't have the students on campus, as you mentioned, you can't have the student athletes. And so then there would be no football in the fall. So that would either mean the academic year would get moved back, and instead of starting in late August, they would maybe move it to October or November. That's certainly an unknown. And then, so that way the season could start then. Or if they basically say, well, no, we're doing online courses for the entire fall semester, then the next best option would be to start, late January, early February. And yeah, that would make for a lot of issues. As you mentioned, Memorial Day could be when the season ends. The next season would be starting just a couple months after that. It would conflict with the NFL draft. You'd probably have a lot of high caliber projected NFL draft picks such as Trevor Lawrence at Clemson and others that probably would sit out the season if it doesn't start until February. But you know what? It's better than the alternative of no football. And make no mistake, the athletic directors know how critical that is. And again, as long as the health and safety of the student athletes will not be compromised, they are going to find out the best way to try to get some part of the season in, again, depending on when we get the all clear.
We're talking with Stadium College Football Insider Brett McMurphy. Follow Brett on Twitter at Brett_McMurphy. Ton of great nuggets and info there from the college football world. Brett, so I guess it's safe to say that the ones who are going to control college football in terms of return are going to be the university presidents and governors, right? Is that basically to say, we heard a lot of coaches, athletic directors speak out, but it's safe to say it's going to be up to the university presidents, like you said, to have students on campus or not, and these governors to allow kind of the all clear to happen. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think the governors, the health officials, the government officials, they're going to determine when, we can start gathering together in groups. So when everyone's not limited in the stay-at-home quarantines and those sort of things. So once those things are lifted, then the next thing would be the university presidents. And then they have to make a decision on if they're going to have classes on campus. Certainly they will be getting input from their athletic directors, and also the Power 5 conference commissioners will have some input as well. But certainly a coach is not going to determine when the season is going to start. An athletic director is not going to determine when the season is going to start. But the athletic directors are in constant contact with the presidents, and so it's kind of going to go down, roll down the hill that way. A lot of people ask me, what's the drop dead date we need to look forward to know if we're going to have college football or not. There's not really a date that I would say, okay, if we don't have something resolved by this date, then we're not having it. But I think what you need to look for, if people have an interest in that, is I think when we get towards the end of May, the 1st of June, I would expect some of these universities to start making decisions on whether they're having classes on campus or not. And I think those schools will make their individual decisions. And once that information comes out, I think you'll kind of get an idea if we're going to have college football in the fall or not. Because certainly if a lot of schools are coming out saying we're not having classes on campus, then you're not going to have a conference come out and say, well, you know what, we're still going to play football because they can't. So I think we'll hear from the individual schools before we get kind of a blanket announcement from the Power 5 commissioners, who will be the ones that announce together, kind of what the plan is. So we're probably another 30 to maybe 60 days away from that definitive answer.
And like you said, we already see schools, even big-time schools like Ohio State, already put all their summer classes online. So like you said, it's going to be, it's starting to get closer and closer for these schools to make a decision about fall classes being online or not. And obviously, like you said, if they're online, probably won't see college football at all during the fall. We are talking with Brett McMurphy from Stadium. So, Brett, you kind of hit on it too. Like you just said, coaches and athletic directors aren't going to be the ones that get football back. I found it interesting over the last few weeks that college football coaches, more than any other, coach in any other sport, are the ones that are speaking out and the most defiant about return, right? You had obviously Mike Gundy, his epic, if you want to call it, rant about getting these players back on campus and getting money through the state of Oklahoma again. You had Dabo Swinney definitively saying that, come in August, their Clemson's going to be packed with fans, and they're going to have their season as normal. I don't know if there's really an answer to it, but is there maybe a a reason why you think these coaches, more than NBA coaches, MLB coaches, NHL coaches, those coaches whose seasons were actually stopped midway through, why college football coaches are so speaking out defiantly and basically trying to speak and will into words that college football was played on time and is unaffected compared to any other sport, or any other coaches should say, in any other sport?
Yeah, you kind of said it, kind of trying to will in words. That's kind of their DNA. That's their makeup. It's like they're in the locker room making this passion speech to go win one for the Gipper or whatever. They obviously do not have any different information or more information than their athletic directors, than their university presidents, than health officials, etc. But so I think part of it is they want to, they want to only, be positive about it, and they want to be as optimistic as possible. And maybe they went a little bit over the edge, but that's just kind of their personalities. Look, I like both of those coaches. They're both very successful. But yeah, they don't have. Look, I gave you my opinion on what I think is going to happen. I don't know. I'm basically reading the tea leaves. They don't know more than I do either. I think they're just trying to be optimistic and showed their optimism to full tilt, obviously.
At least last question in terms of college football being played, the possibility, if not, if so. We already saw Cincinnati, kind of the first shoe drop with what could happen if we don't see college football played at some point during the academic calendar. They cut soccer. You had the Group of Five conference write a letter to Mark Emmert asking for relief for some of the for how they could say D1. So basically, not having them or force them to cut sports. How much or how big a trouble are some of these non-revenue sports at some of these big time schools if college football, if the worst possible case happens where we don't have college football at all during the 2020-2021 academic calendar? Could we see a ton of non-revenue sports get cut, or do you think if this is just maybe a one-year thing, schools can still survive and sports could still survive if college football and that revenue is not played?
Well, from the athletic directors I talked to, they said cutting sports is a last resort option. But certainly when you're looking at trying to recoup some of this revenue, even if we still do have a season, even if it is delayed, the revenue's not going to be what it's been in past years because of probably lower attendance, and you're playing, at weird times of the year, so different factors would come into play. But yeah, it's going to impact all schools from the Power 5 level to the Group of 5 level. In your scenario, if there's no football at all, one AD summed it up best to me. He said, if we don't have a football season, we're bleeped. And
that's a good point.
That means Group of 5 schools could drop football. That means Group of 5, Power 5 schools would probably eliminate Olympic sports overnight. Would it be for temporary or would it be permanent? It'd probably be permanent, but you don't know that stuff. But certainly, Iowa State, Washington State, Wake Forest, among some of the schools, Oregon, that have announced that either coaching or athletic staff have taken pay cuts, and these are Power 5 schools. And this just has to do with the loss of revenue from the NCAA basketball tournament. This has nothing to do with what's we still don't know is going to happen. So yeah, it could get pretty grim. And certainly I think one thing is because of this, I think, since conference expansion in the past dozen or so years, we've seen the kind of gap between the power schools and the non-power schools grow bigger and bigger. Certainly the media rights deals where the Power 5 schools are getting up to $50 million per school, where the smaller conference schools are getting maybe $3 or $4 million per school. I think this, COVID-19 and the financial impact of it, I think it's going to accelerate. It's certainly that's why the athletic directors feel so supportive of $50 million